All right, welcome everybody. I would like to introduce our moderator for tonight's discussion. Kelly Everett is a concert pianist and cellist, avid reader, mother, hiker, biker, and she also happens to be co-owner of Village Books and Paper Dreams. She had so much fun the last time we hosted Jacqueline that she is here again to moderate the conversation. So welcome, Kelly.
Thank you. Hello, everybody.
And now for our featured author. Jacqueline Winspear is the author of the New York Times best-selling Maisie Dobbs novels. Her standalone novel, The Care and Management of Lies, was also a New York Times bestseller and a finalist for the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. Jacqueline has published 2 nonfiction books, What Would Maisie Do? And an Edgar-nominated memoir, This Time Next Year We'll Be Laughing. She's here tonight to present number 17, I believe it's number 17 in the
It's
Maisie
number
Dobbs
17.
series. Here we go, A Sunlit Weapon. So, welcome Jacqueline Winspear and Kelly Everett.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, Jacqueline. How are you this evening?
I'm fine. It's lovely to see you again.
It's good to see you again. One year later. We look pretty good still. We're doing good.
Yeah, indeed. That's great.
So the 17th book, did you ever think that you would get to 17th book through 2 wars? And
I didn't even think I'd get past number 1, to tell you the truth, because when I was writing Maisie Dobbs, I thought this was going to be my only novel. I thought this was it. I did it, and then I'll go back to doing whatever, the other things that I was doing, and it wasn't like that. And I don't know if I ever told you the story, but it was when the book went into production, my then editor, the late Laura Rushka of Soho Press, called me and said, well, your book's gone into production, and let's talk about the next book in the series. What do you have in mind? And I went, the next book. Right, okay. I had to tap dance a little bit. And there's a whole story about how I came up with the rest, but it gave me a chance to really think about, what I wanted to create. And I knew that I wanted to create something where, it wasn't as if each book happened on the same day. I realized I had a wonderful opportunity, and that opportunity was to create, if you will, a saga, where there was an arc to the whole big story, as well as an arc to each story, each mystery, so to speak. And that I would be able to follow this, not just Maisie Dobbs, but this ensemble cast through time, and see how they were impacted, not just by the events of their day, but what was happening in their personal lives and how they interacted with each other, and so on and so forth. Just like, anyone does over a period of, X number of years. Right. We are part of one another's lives when we work together, when we've got best friends, family, and so on. And that's really what I wanted to do. And having the mystery as the foundation for each particular story gave me a wonderful opportunity, because it is the archetypal journey through chaos to resolution, and it's I think it offers the writer a terrific opportunity to investigate the human condition under pressure. So that was it. 17 novels. No, never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd get this far.
Well, we're so glad you did. And the wonderful thing about your books are that people can meet Maisie at number 17, and nothing is being lost amongst the books. They can start there if they're like, oh, and as a bookseller, I can sell it without them reading the others, and then they will, I know, go back and read all the other ones. So
it's interesting the number of people that do just that. There'll be something that attracts them about the novel, and in this case, it could be any one of the story threads, and or just the cover or whatever. And then they'll read it and think, I want to go back to the beginning. I want to find out how we got to this place. And so every year a new cadre of readers comes to the series, which is, I think, happens to obviously a lot of people that have a series, and it's wonderful for a writer. Yeah. It's really wonderful.
Well, in our store, it takes up a whole shelf, so it makes it really, it's very striking. So customers do gravitate towards it for sure. So it's so fun. Yeah. And you just said something about your cover, and your covers are always, they stand out. I like how they're very consistent in the art. And in this last one, I just noticed this JW. Is that your initials?
Yes, it is.
Ah!
And it's so funny. Most people miss that. In fact, I missed it for an awfully long time. And yet my brother picked up the book and he said, "Oh, look, he's put a JW on the plane." But the covers I'm very fortunate in that I have a lot of input in the covers, and
Oh, good.
it's such a great process because Andrew Davidson, who's the artist craftsman, he starts off with a sketch, and usually what I send him is send me photographs and so on. I say, well, this is the kind of thing I've got in my head, and it's almost as if he can see right into what's going on in those little gray cells. And he does some sketches, and when a sketch is approved, at the publisher, HarperCollins, then he goes to the next stage, which is actually a woodcut. It's
No,
the
really?
original is a print, and he has a very old printing press. I've actually got a
Okay.
photograph somewhere on my Facebook page of him literally pulling off the print as it happened. So once it's done, there's no tinkering around with it. I mean, it has to be boom, perfect, because it's the most beautiful woodcut and print from
Just
there.
amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I can kind of see it now that you say that a little
Yeah.
bit, but that's great.
And then of course there's the creative director Archie, who just pulls everything together, and which is wonderful, with the getting the right colors for the typeface and everything.
And
Yeah,
over the years, it changes hairstyles, helmets,
Yeah.
and everything. So they have to get that.
hats. Yeah.
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 That's so great. So this story, oh my gosh, has so many layers. To name a few, we've got school bullying, segregation, kidnapping, murder, marriage, friendships, bigotry, war, in-laws, Eleanor Roosevelt, Munchausen syndrome, and tea. Lots of tea.
Yeah.
So how, it's so much. How did you keep it all straight? Did you just have like sticky notes to try to figure out what?
No, I've just gone.
Just went for it.
I just went for it. And interestingly enough, Munchausen syndrome was not named at that point, so I couldn't name it. But I think anyone who knows anything about that will realize what had happened in that case. It's really interesting because one of the things that I've done over the years, I've kept a notebook of things that I might like to write about, that whether it could be in a standalone novel, but particularly with regard to the series. And it could be an aspect of history, particularly women's history, social history. It could be to do with a war. It could be to do with an event. It could be a theme and so on. And of course, as we get to certain years, as time has gone on, I've looked and thought, okay, this is what I want to explore. And I knew that at some point I wanted to explore the issue of Black American soldiers coming to a non-segregated country. And boom, it was 1942. Eleanor Roosevelt, she's in Britain exactly the time I wanted to write about. I could not ignore her visit. And the more I researched her visit, I realized yes, it was an incredibly big event, but the production of getting her safely to Britain and then around Britain and then home again in a time of war when the Luftwaffe were out and the U-boats were out. And not only that, but she was a very high value target, very high value. And in fact, and this is something that's mentioned in the book, she as part of her tour, she visited Canterbury Cathedral in Kent, and then later on the little village of Barham in Kent, which was nearby. And the day after she visited, it was bombed. I mean, 20 bombs were dropped on Canterbury. And had they, they were, as they say, a day late and a dollar short. If they had been there the day before, we could be talking about a different history altogether now.
Right.
And in fact, I think it was towards the end of her tour, the president got in touch with Winston Churchill, said, we want her back here, and we want her back here safely, because yes, there were people who didn't like her as well. Because of her support for Black Americans, for the fact that she was somewhat vocal about Japanese citizens being put into internment camps. And she wanted more. I mean, in America, when she had a press conference, she said, only women journalists. So all the newspapers had to scramble to hire women.
That's
You
great.
know, she's only letting in women. That wasn't so in Britain, even though Britain had a lot of, you know, a good number of women journalists. But it was so that had to be part of the story, and it wove in very, very nicely with everything else. The more I looked into and researched Eleanor Roosevelt, and particularly her time in Britain, and she really enjoyed coming back to Britain, because she was between the ages of 15 and 18. She was at school in Britain at Allenswood Academy, which is just outside Wimbledon. It was a kind of a finishing school ladies' college, and she loved her time there, and she loved that that women were really pressed to be independent as well, not just, as we might say today, arm candy. It was so it was it was really interesting to write about her and to weave her into the story. Yeah.
Sure. And she's so tall. What is she? Almost 6 feet tall, that you could pick her out of a crowd pretty easily. So
that was one of the funny parts of it, actually, Kelly, because she flew into Shannon on an assumed name, and her secretary was with her, both under assumed names. And one of the questions asked was, well, did anyone recognize her? Well, they knew who she was as soon as she got,
Sure.
they could have called her Frida Blogs, and they still don't know who she was. So it was interesting. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's amazing how you weaved everything together.
Well, thank you.
Including her. So ATA stood for Air Transport Auxiliary. You want to explain to some of us what that is?
Yes, the Air Transport Auxiliary, they were not part of the RAF. They were a civilian organization founded in 1939 by Gerard Delanger, who was an aviation enthusiast, but he was also chairman of the then British Airways, which later became BOAC and then went back to being British Airways again. He realized pretty quickly, as did a number of people, that the RAF pilots could not be ferrying aircraft around. They were needed up in the air doing the business of fighting, whether they were in a fighter aircraft or a bomber or whatever. And aircraft needed to be moved around very quickly, whether it be to a major maintenance depot, out of the factory, down to an aerodrome, from positioning aircraft from one aerodrome to another, taking training aircraft from one place to another, and also to the breakers yard. That was one of the most dangerous jobs. And so they set about hiring commercial pilots and also men who had been pilots in the previous war. There was one guy flying who actually only had one leg, and he was blind in one eye or something like that from his wounds in the previous war, the Great War. But they needed the pilots up there, and it was Delanger's idea, and I don't even know if I'm actually pronouncing that correctly, to say, we have a lot of women pilots, which they did, because between the wars, if you were, a girl of some means, being a pilot gave you a freedom, a terrific level of freedom. And some of the early women pilots for the ATA were already flyers. They didn't need to be trained. They were literally, they used to throw the hand. Oh, you're flying a Spitfire today. Okay, there's the handbook. You've got 20 minutes with it. I mean, seriously, it was like that. And actually, interesting enough, as soon as I have to position my glasses like this, otherwise we'll get the glare. But almost as soon as the ATA, and they named them the Adder Girls, and as Mary Wilkins Ellis said, they were she was one of the early pilots. We were the glamour girls of flight, definitely the glamour girls of flight. But boy, did they work hard. And almost as soon as they started bringing women on board, which was fairly soon after the founding, American women came over. Jackie Cochran was one of the first. She later went back and founded the Wasps. And there was women. There was a woman from Argentina. There were some Czech pilots, definitely some Polish women, because they, just like the male pilots, they had, they wanted to get back at the Luftwaffe. But it was a very dangerous job. for anyone, because you were flying aircraft without ammunition on board, no radios, no nothing. If a lone wolf Luftwaffe pilot came out of the clouds, there was only one thing that was going to get you out of trouble, and that was your airmanship. But the interesting thing about those women is that they were the first ever government employees to gain pay parity with men. And that, gain pay. By the time 1943 rolled round, they were on exactly the same salary. The Atta girls.
Atta girl.
Yeah.
And so they were flying Spitfires in the book. That was the name of the airplane, or airplanes. Did you sit in one so that you could?
No, unfortunately, the COVID put paid to my plans to go up in a Spitfire. The Spitfire was, I mean, there were many different aircraft obviously used in the war, but the Supermarine Spitfire with its famous Merlin engine was the fastest aircraft in the world at that point, which is why a lot of Americans came over. The American male pilots came over initially to, even before Pearl Harbor, to volunteer. And they were, the RAF made a special squadron for them known as the Eagle Squadron. And one of the reasons, and some of them were barnstormers, they were agricultural pilots, they were postal pilots, commercial pilots. They all wanted to get into the Spitfire. And some of them ended up in Hurricanes or whatever, and so on, but which is also a wonderful aircraft. But that's why a lot of those American girls came over as well. Everybody wanted to get into that aircraft. And but the thing is that if you take someone again like Mary Ellis, she throughout the war, she flew way more hours than any other, than any male pilot. And she flew something like 74 different kinds of aircraft during the war. And on any one day, you didn't just fly one aircraft. First thing in the morning, you'd get this thing called a chit, which had your list of to-dos for the day. And okay, I've got to take a Blenheim to Northamptonshire, and a Blenheim was a type of bomber. Okay, and then I'm taking a Hurricane to Hawkinge. I've got to take a Spitfire to Biggin Hill, and oh no, I've got to take a short Sterling up to somewhere else, which is another type of aircraft. So, and sometimes it was just a case of there's the instruction book. Okay, girl, get on with it. And don't show us up in front of the RAF. Perfect landings every time.
Wow. Wow. That need for speed, huh?
Yeah.
Always happen.
They were young, that's the thing. They were young. Mm-hmm. And so who can blame them?
Yeah, I just heard a motorcycle zoom by, so I can get it. So the title, A Sunlit Weapon, can you just tell us really quickly about your title of your book?
Yes, it's taken from the two things. Number one is a poem, a very famous poem by John Gillespie. I've got the details here in front of me. I should have had that page at the ready. And it's called High Flight by John Gillespie McGee. And he was an Anglo-American pilot. He actually was with the Canadian Air Force, the Royal Canadian Air Force. Mm-hmm. I think he'd been born in the United States. He refers to high in the sunlit silence, hovering there. But and the idea of being, I have been up in a light aircraft. I've not flown one myself. And there is that idea of high in the sunlit silence. I loved that. But Eleanor Roosevelt said the following, and she was very keen once, because one of the things she really wanted to see when she came to Britain was the ATA. And that was the purpose for her visit, by the way. She had been invited by Queen Elizabeth, who is the mother of the present Queen, to come to Britain to see the amazing war work that Britain's women were engaged in. And so she saw all manner of women working. And she really wanted to see the ATA. And she was very keen on the idea of a similar organization being started in the US. There was a sort of organization doing it, but not the WASPs. And as I said, it was Jacqueline Cochran that went back to do that. But Eleanor Roosevelt said, we are in a war and we need to fight it with all our ability and every weapon possible. Women pilots in this particular case, are a weapon waiting to be used.
I like that.
Oh, me too. Me too. I mean, good for you, Ona. And there's also, something that Mary, I say Mary, I don't know as if I know her, but Mary, if I can find the quote from Mary Wilkins Ellis. Ellis was her married name. And she said the following. By the way, she only died in 2018, and she was 101 years old.
Right.
And she had been flying since the age of 16, and after the war she ran an airport. I mean, a small airport, but all the same. And she was also I think the first woman, she was one of the first women to fly Britain's first ever jet aircraft after the war, which was the Gloucester Meteor. But anyway, she said this: men take ownership of war and talk endlessly of their duty. I can't imagine why they don't think women feel such things too. And I thought, and that was from her memoir, and I that really grabbed me, I must say. Yeah.
Wow.
So.
Yeah. I was also curious about the American soldiers that would come over and work on the English farms.
Yeah, that was something that happened early on in the tenure, and a bit throughout the time that American soldiers were in Britain. There were various, let's say, initiatives to sort of, it was the winning hearts and minds. By the time the Americans came over, which would have been in the, it was after Pearl Harbor, they started shipping out in the early part of 42. And in fact, the first Americans to arrive on British soil, the greater number were actually Black Americans, because they worked in maintenance units, not so much combat units. And so they were building the runways, they were building bases, you name it, they were building. And but one of the things that the Americans thought it would be a good idea to do, because so many British men had been lost to the war, they were overseas. And we had the Land Army girls who were absolutely brilliant, but they said, we can help with the harvest. And I think it was very good for morale on both sides, because the British could see that these Americans were getting stuck in to help and doing more than handing out nylon stockings and cigarettes, which were very gratefully received, I later understood.
Yeah, my dad had stories about that.
Yeah, I bet. And and it was a way for, and also the Britain, in fact, this was actually written about in I don't know if your dad told you this, that all American GIs were given a little handbook of what to expect in Britain. It was things like, if you go to someone's house, they're going to offer you tea. Okay, it's just how it is.
Just drink the tea.
And there are a couple of things that were in there that really resonated. And one of the things was, remember, you are going to a country that has had the life beaten out of it by bombing. And that not just the cities, and every city in Britain had been bombed, but towns. And there's a distinction in Britain between a city and a town. And also even villages, because if the Luftwaffe were leaving London and then going across Kent and they had a bomb or two, well, let's drop it, In fact, one of the things I wrote about in my memoir was something my mother saw, which was horrific. And that was when she was evacuated in Kent. And it was something that was done by a Luftwaffe pilot, which was a horrific act as he was, coming down, actually. But so anyway, it said, Britain is not at its best. The people are tired, and yet what a welcome they gave. But and the other thing that was interesting, and it was one of the last things, is that you're going to see a lot of women in uniform, and you're going to see men saluting women officers. And of course, a lot of men weren't used to seeing that in the United States at that point. And it said, absolutely understand that woman deserves the salute, because she didn't get her stripes and she didn't get in stars by being the one who knitted most socks. She was standing at her station, in an anti-aircraft depot or something like that, or she was flying, or she was doing this, that, or the other. Yeah.
Wow.
So it was interesting. But yes, they helped with the harvest. And I often think how poignant that must have been, because they knew what they were there for, and it wasn't really to bring in harvests, it was to go to war. and there were young men who probably all of them didn't know what it was like to go to war. They'd heard about it from their
Oh,
fathers,
no.
perhaps.
No, they were just young.
They're young, and then, you know,
They
and
were
then
young, and then they get shipped out to another country. That's kind of what my dad said. He goes, I was living on a farm at 18, and all of a sudden I'm on a boat and I'm in Europe, and
yeah,
it was eye-opening, but yeah, what an experience.
and
Poor
actually
guys.
my my mother-in-law, to whom the book is dedicated, she shipped out early in 1942 with the American Army Nursing Corps. And she didn't go home again until 1946. And she was about to be shipped out to the Pacific Theater, and when VJ Day happened. And
Wow.
yeah. So
Wow. Well, I do know there's other stories like that. I knew a family out in Port Angeles, actually, and he was a Clallam Indian, and he was shipped to England during World War II and met his wife in Liverpool somewhere, and brought her back at the end of it, and she was living out there, and boy, she was mom to everybody. She was just
war
deeply
brides,
adored.
the phenomenon of war brides,
Right.
it's actually one of my aunts was engaged to an American officer, and by all accounts they were very much in love. But in those days, if you went overseas, across the Atlantic, you thought you would never ever see your family again. And she realized that it was such a long way to go, and it was such a big step, and she decided not to go.
Oh.
And it was interesting, she later married someone else, and my uncle, and they were very happily married. But what was wonderful is they kept in touch, and it was actually when after they'd retired, they both retired, and first of all it was sort of it was them from the families to one another, and this gentleman and his wife came to England on holiday.
Oh wait, I think I just read that.
Oh, I read it in my I wrote about it in my memoir.
I think that was the last thing I just read. I was like, wait, this story sounds familiar.
My aunt had really red hair. There's a lot of redheads in my family, and he used to call her his Red. Oh. And apparently, that he saw her in the distance walking towards him with my uncle, and he's with his wife, and he went, "There's my Red." And she had grey hair. Oh, it was so funny. Really made me laugh.
See, that's great. I'm glad.
But my mum told me that you'll never guess what happened to your aunt, and it was a lovely story.
That is a lovely story. I'm glad they were able to do that.
Yeah,
see each other.
Yeah.
Oh, well, this is a story about Maisie, and Maisie seems to just know so much. And
more than me.
First of all, I was going to ask, are you Maisie? Do you take any part of yourself?
No, not at all. I'm not Maisie. No, I'm not Maisie.
I'm sure people have wondered that. So
I mean,
there it is.
I think there's, when you're a writer, there's something of you in every character. You could say that, really. And I know that if I want to take Maisie to task about something, I'm definitely in Priscilla's head, but and yeah, but no, I'm not a Maisie Dobbs type person.
Okay. Well, what do you really want Maisie to teach people? I mean, she's a teacher, she's a philosopher, she's got all these, a nurse, but what do you want your readers to really take away from reading about Maisie?
When I first began to create the character, and as she revealed herself to me, because I think any writer would say it's almost sometimes like a two-way street. What I really wanted her to do was to reflect the spirit of her generation of women. Mm-hmm. And she was among that first generation of women in modern times to go to war in great numbers. And so, for example, in the United States, yes, women were engaged in the First World War, but not in the terrific numbers that they were in Britain. And, I think before the First World War, there was something like 1.5 million women working, something like that, 2 million. But they were largely doing invisible jobs. Mm-hmm. Although some were working in offices, but they were working at home, they were taking washing or whatever, and they were governesses and so on, teachers. But during that First World War, women moved into public life as never before. I mean, they were not a field of endeavor was left untouched by a woman's hand, and they literally held the country together, because all the younger men were definitely overseas, and and Maisie, of course, as we know, went to war. And after the war, that generation were extraordinary. There's a lot that happened politically later on that you could sort of say this generation got us that, including things like the National Health Service. But then you get, that generation, they went through the Second World War as well. And so if anything, I wanted to reflect the spirit of an extraordinary generation of women. Many of that generation had to forge a life alone when they had never expected to,
Right.
because so many young men of marriageable age had been killed or were left incredibly profoundly wounded. But there's this, Maisie has these qualities of endurance and resilience. And I think that, and also compassion, definitely compassion, and the ability to ask questions rather than just jump to a conclusion about a person. So I think those are qualities that I wanted her to have. Now, do I want her to teach people anything? No, I didn't go into, I'm a writer, I didn't go into it to be a teacher. But if the people learn something from any one of the characters, well, that's icing on the cake. Or if they take away something, not learn something, if they take away something that gives them food for thought. And that was why I wrote What Would Maisie Do? Because so many readers asked me to, are you going to do a book of quotes from Maisie or Maurice Blanche or whoever? And I started asking, well, what are your favorite quotes from the books? What are your favorite passages? What does it mean to you? And that's when I wrote What Would Maisie Do? And it was concentrating on about 28 of the passages that readers felt really resonated with them and had touched them. So I basically wrote about where that came from, what was the inspiration for that. So I think, again, it's resilience, endurance, it's compassion. And I think we've seen so much of that lately on the news, for example, in Ukraine. And when you see, people giving exhausted Russian soldiers, a cup of tea and a cell phone so that they can call their mum, that's compassion. That's compassion at the first order when you think of how people are suffering.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And there is, there's so many things that are happening right now that are very similar. In fact, I'm watching some of the kids on their own in the Ukraine getting put on buses and being sent out by themselves. Well, the same thing happened in London. They sent the kids to the countryside, and some of it was good, some of it not so good.
Yeah.
So
1.5 million children, as you know, because you've been reading my memoir. My mum was one of them, and her family, her sisters and brothers. They were all evacuated. And I remember my aunt saying to me, she was 4 at the time, and she said, I felt like an orphan until I was 10.
Sure.
And
she probably felt like it for quite a bit after that too.
Something, and here's the interesting thing, that and there was a book about this, it's called War Child by Dr. Martin Parsons, that an experience of war, particularly in childhood, takes 3 generations to work its way through the family system. And so, and that can show up in all sorts of different ways. It could be hypervigilance. It could be in, sort of not, and I'm just thinking of the grandchildren of these kids that are suffering now in Ukraine or suffering as refugees, that their children and grandchildren might have fears and behaviors that they will never be able to explain. And it's because, in a way, they're all the children of war.
Right.
All the children of war.
God, it's just dumb.
Yeah. It's a tragedy. It's a massive tragedy. Yeah.
Horrible. Well, if you were to sit down and have tea with Maisie, what would be one of the first questions you would ask her?
Oh, in a way, I have tea with Maisie every day that I work.
That's true.
That's a really difficult question, because I would probably ask her something really simple, like, why the heck do you like Eccles cakes? What is it?
was going to ask you about those.
Yeah, and I don't know that I just want to talk to her about ordinary things, you know, about her life. I would
Yeah.
want to know how, you know, questions that probably be really rude to ask, actually, about, you know, how she felt going back to that place where she saw death of a most terrible kind, and that I
Right.
wrote about that in Pardonable Lies. And in fact, that, you know, is a brings me to what I think is one of the most important questions that writers ask of themselves, and that is, how would I feel if? And that's when you're trying to get inside the head of your character, because there was a scene that I had to write for Pardonable Lies where Maisie is returned to the place where she saw death of a most terrible kind as a very impressionable age. She goes to this casualty clearing station cemetery, and it's, you know, and I visited the battlefields of the Somme and Ypres 2 or 3 times, and I was standing in exactly that, a casualty clearing station cemetery. It was probably no bigger than the footprint of my house, and yet there were the graves there of you know, some doctors and nurses, also some German doctors, because if you were a doctor in the First World War and you were captured by the enemy, you immediately went to work for them, because your job as a doctor, it was recognized, is to save lives. And I can remember standing there, thinking, in the pouring rain, thinking, okay, how would I feel if? And I knew that in that very moment I would fall to my knees, because I would not be able to, my legs would not keep me standing, because of that, the memories that would flood. And I was only able to write the scene that I wrote because I had stood in that place and really tried to get into the head of the character. So that's what you do more than anything, I think, is how would I feel if, and hope that you get it right. Hope that you get it right.
Well, I think you did, for sure, many times. Okay, well, we're getting close to question time, but I'm gonna just ask you something a little bit more lighter. What books are you drawn to for fun while you're writing?
Well, while I'm writing, the books I'm drawn to are mainly about, you know, research.
Yeah.
And I read very broadly and deeply. I'm currently working on another standalone novel that will be published next year, and it's sort of the intersection of it's set in post World War II London, and also the countryside, because I like to be in the countryside, and it's you know, that place where organized crime, the Secret Service, and dastardly deeds of government come together, that intersection. So I've been reading a lot about organized crime.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
Actually, it's really interesting. I mean, you know, if you know anything about World War II, you know about organized crime. I mean, seriously, it flourished.
Or just human nature, probably.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, it's interesting to reflect on that. So, but what do I read? You know, I like to read a lot of different magazine articles, actually, and a little bit of humor never hurts either. You know, I'll read something that, you know, makes me laugh. And that's one of the things I weave into my books. You know, I mean, there are humorous moments, you know, humorous conversations, and I think that's something that happens in life anyway. Even at the worst of times, you can, you know, you can have a laugh over something.
Yeah. Well, I sure enjoy Maisie's husband. I think he brings a little bit of levity to her busy days.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. And so does Billy. And you know, although he's one of those people that you know, and we've all met them. It's one thing after another. They have to, but he's still got this sort of. He does his best to keep his happy-go-lucky outlook on life. And yes, I do like Mark. I have to admit, after I first, you know, created the character, I thought, oh, I've got a bit of a crush on him. I think I'll have to bring him back.
Yeah. Did you base him on anyone?
No, I didn't actually.
No. Okay.
No, I didn't.
Well, he seems very lovely.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I always enjoy our talks. I wish they could be longer, and I hope for number 18. Maybe we'll be doing this again next year about this time.
Probably the
We'll-
year after, because
Oh,
next
okay,
year
year
is a
after. Okay, that's
standalone.
fair enough. Fair enough.
We'll be chatting about organized crime again next year.
Okay, I'll do that. Well, good. Well, I'm going to let Claire take it away for a little bit. Thank you
Okay.
so much,
Oh,
Jacqueline.
it's always lovely to talk to you. Really
Oh,
lovely.
Always
Thank
is
you.
talking to you. Thank you.
Oh, this is so much fun to listen to. So just a reminder to our audience members to please put your questions in the Q&A so that we can, now is the time to ask her all those burning questions that you've been wondering about. And since you mentioned Maisie's husband, there is actually a question about using Maisie's maiden name. We have a viewer who asks, was it a difficult decision to have Maisie continue to use her maiden name in your work? I expect it would have been fairly unusual during that time.
It was unusual, but not unheard of.
Okay.
Particularly if a married woman had a company or something like that. Which actually, between the wars, there were women who set up their own businesses. And of course, the other thing that happened between the wars was that it was the great age of the British woman novelist. And, there was a job you could do at home with no training, as I know only too well. And so it was not unusual. And no, it wasn't a difficult decision at all. It was how it had to be, as far as I was concerned, because she is Maisie Dobbs. And and she will refer to herself by her married name when it suits her. And I think that's just part of who she is. And it suits them both, actually, because of the nature of their work. And they've tried very hard to, keep a definite division there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering, when you finish a Maisie Dobbs novel, do you how quickly after you know you're done with that one, do you have the thought of, okay, what's next for her?
Oh,
Is it immediate?
Well, I've usually, how can I say this? I usually start thinking about a book that I'm going to write years before I write it. So I kind of know what comes next.
Okay.
I knew what came next. I knew what came next ages before I think The Mapping of Love and Death, I think that was sitting there stewing in its juices for 4 years.
Interesting.
Something like that. And so yes, I don't have to sit and think about it, except for the detail. I have the seeds. I have the seed and the kindling, usually.
Okay.
The kindling, the kindling is a better way to say it. I have the kindling. Then I have to get the fuel going.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That makes sense. Could you please remind us, Lena says, sorry, I may have missed this, but could you please explain what the ATA is?
It's the Air Transport Auxiliary.
Okay.
And it was a government organization. It was not part of the RAF, and hence that was why the nickname the Atta Girls.
Atta Girls. Right.
But in fact, women pilots only made up 10% of the entire force of pilots with the ATA. Only about 10%, but there were about 100. I think there were about 126 of them, something like that. And yes, they flew a lot of aircraft.
Okay. Wow. Christine has listened to your audiobooks, and she says, I love Orla Cassidy's narration. Do you select the person who reads the audiobooks?
No, it's nothing to do with me.
Yeah,
nothing to do with me. That's out of my hands, and I don't even listen to them because
really?
No, I can't listen to them. I just can't do it. No.
Okay. Okay.
It's just like, once my books are done, I don't go back and read them. It's I love looking at it. It's done, and I'll read excerpts when I have to, but I don't sort of think, well, I've got to read that book again. Maybe one day I will, because then I'll start thinking, gosh, I don't remember writing that. Really something that happens, and I think any writer will tell you that. I was at a bookstore event once, and this gentleman said, in such and such a book, you said, and I went, I did. Okay, what did you mean by it? Well, I have no idea, actually. But let me think of what I might have been thinking at the time. It was like 4 books ago. And in fact, it's even difficult talking about a book on a book tour, because you're right. Usually in a book, by the time you're doing a book tour, be it virtual or in person, you are so into the book you're already writing. That's the
Right.
one that's
Sure.
uppermost.
Right. Yes. I can see how that would happen. I mean, and I have actually seen that happen at author events too, where an author
Yeah.
is quoted back to them, and they're
Yeah.
like, "Huh, wow, I wrote that."
I was really must have been in a zone then. And I think that's what happens. You absolutely get in the zone. I know I do. And I, actually one of my dearest, oldest friends in England said to me, he said, I don't know where you come up with all this stuff. And I said, I don't know either.
Oh, well, here's kind of a good question to piggyback on that. Carolyn would like to know if you ever have night dreams about Maisie. Do you ever dream about her?
You know what? I used to dream a bit about Maurice Blanche. And then that's when I thought, he's I've got to do something about this bloke. He's bothering me. But no, I know I don't. I will wake up thinking about her, which is different. I won't have dreams about her, but
Okay.
I will wake up thinking about her. I'll wake up with an idea. And of course, then you think, oh, do I get up and write this down? Or will I remember it in the morning? And usually you have to get up and write it down. But no, or I wake up, I think, working something out in my head, an aspect of her life or something like that, or what happens next. So no, but I do dream other stories. I have dreamt other stories in my life, and in fact, the whole, Maisie Dobbs came to me when I was actually daydreaming. I was stuck in traffic. I don't know if I ever
Really?
told you that. So I was on my way to work, stuck in traffic, the sort of traffic that you get when there's a terrible rainstorm. And I was looking down the street and it was all stoplights and tail lights, and I thought, oh, I'm never going to get to work. And it was just stopped. All the traffic was stopped. And admittedly, I come from a long line of daydreamers, and I just started daydreaming. It probably started off thinking, did I leave the back door open for the dog or something like that? And suddenly this woman walked into my life. It was like watching a movie. She came up through Warren Street Station. I knew it was Warren Street Station because I used to work in Fitzroy Square. And but it was the old-fashioned escalator, wooden, not stained steel. And it was clunkety, clunkety, clunk. And she didn't come through one of the machines, that grabs you as you try to get through it. It was the old turnstile. And she came out, she had a conversation with a newspaper vendor. She walked down the street. She took out an envelope with 2 keys in it. And then I heard all this honking, because I was stuck there in this zone, and the traffic had built up behind me, and there was actually someone yelled out, you're waiting for any particular shade of green, lady. So I had to quickly steam off. But by the time I got to work, I pretty much had this whole story in my head, and I had never ever written fiction before.
Wow.
I was a writer of nonfiction. I wrote articles and essays. I never thought I would ever turn my hand to fiction. And I enjoy fiction very much because I realized, and I know there are writers out there thinking, well, she took a while to figure it out. I had to be writing my first book to realize it, that you can touch truth more readily with fiction than you can with fact, which is nice work if you can get it, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, we have another question from an anonymous attendee who would like to know, how do you decide when Maisie will have a spiritual or supernatural influence to aid her investigation?
I think actually it's what she has is a sensitivity. I think supernatural is maybe, as she might say, over-egging the pudding a bit, although there have been moments. She is more what we would refer to in Britain as a sensitive, which means she has a great depth of intuition. And I mean, we all kind of have that intuition, but most of us don't use it. And the people that use it find that it grows. And again, that is not something I planned for. It is absolutely organic in the writing. And it's usually a thought or a feeling, a sense that I am being lied to, a sense that there's more to this than meets the eye. And I think we all have those moments. We all know if someone is not quite telling us the truth, or there's more to this person, or there is a melancholy about them, and yet they're smiling. I think we all know that. Maisie feels that within her, because it is automatic for her, for example, to, if the way someone comports themselves, the way they carry themselves, if she assumes that sort of position, and it's well known this really works, that she can feel what they're feeling. And it's not it's actually a technique used by a lot of psychologists, but I don't plan for those moments. So much of what I write is not planned. I mean, I go with the moment, and I can give you an example of that. And I think it was Pardonable Lies. Maisie was going to be, the plan was that she was being engaged by a friend of Lord Julian's, who was his wife on her deathbed had asked him to find out if their son had really died in the war, the First World War, because she had always felt that her son was still alive, and he was, no, we heard that he was dead. He's not alive. And so I had planned that we would start there. We would start with her meeting with this gentleman. And I sat down to write, and something completely different happened. And I thought, when these things happen, you've just got to go with it. And it was the scene where Maisie is called to Vine Street Police Station because a young girl of 12 years old was brought in under suspicion of murder. And she was extremely poorly presented. She was, her arms and legs were dirty, her clothing was ripped, and so on and so forth. And Maisie, the first thing she does is ask for someone to bring her a bowl of hot water with a cloth, and she sits and she washes the girl's hands and feet. And it's the first thing she does. And it was in a way one of those sort of gifts that an author gets, because it allowed me throughout the story to weave in something else which was really important, which was Maisie's own grief at losing her mother, and at an early age. And so that's an example that you know, I don't plan for these events. I write my way into them. Yeah. You know, I don't sort of think, right, well, this is the moment she's going to have some kind of something happen. No. It's very organic in terms of what happens when.
I love that you write your way into them.
Yeah, that's what I do all the time, is you write your way into something, you know. That's why sometimes, you know, the first paragraph you write every day you just get rid of, because you're writing your way into the story again.
Wow. A bit of, let's see, some detail here. Jan would like to be reminded, what year was Maisie born? So how old is she?
I've got to remember this. She is 3 years older than the century.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, she was 13 in 1910, so 2 or 3 years older than the century. Yeah. Okay. So we've seen her grow, and now here she is, you know, getting on for 45.
Wow.
A woman in her prime.
That's
yes.
Phew.
Yep, a woman in her prime. The prime of Maisie Dobbs.
Right. Well, this has just been wonderful. Again.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Yeah.
We really appreciate your joining us tonight and giving us a glimpse into the world of Maisie Dobbs. Do you have, incidentally, this is just a personal question of me, because I think that the covers are so gorgeous. Do you have a personal favorite of the Maisie Dobbs covers?
I have a couple of favorites. I love this one, The Mapping of Love and Death.
Okay. Yeah.
And most of them come from sort of an idea I had, which is lovely, and then Andrew just got it in one. And it's just her, she's got a map and she's looking over the Weald of Kent, and he got it just right, and I love that. And my other favorite, if it's here, I can't see it immediately, let me see, where is it? It's probably standing up somewhere where I can't grab it for now. Elegy for Eddie.
That's
And
my
the
favorite.
reason I love it is
I
it
love
came
that one.
out, it came out the year my dad my dad passed away.
Oh.
And it was on his it was there in the hospital, because he loved it when people say, oh, is that any relation to you? And then he could talk about it, you know. But also the cover, it's not the horse was taken from a photograph of my horse, who actually very sadly later he had to be laid to rest. My horse Oliver, a beautiful Frisian. And my dad looked at the cover, and it's got the horse. I wanted it to really look like this: the horse and carriage, a horse and cart actually, and the motor car together.
Mhm.
And my dad said to me, he said, that is my childhood. That is my
Oh.
childhood. Because, you know, in London then, yes, there were motor cars, but you didn't have to go far out of, you know, the center of London, like, you know, away from Oxford Street, just south of the river, when you wouldn't see a motor car at all. It was all horses and carts, you know. And the book was based upon a story that my dad told me about a young man that he knew when he was a boy. And it was based on a true story, the story of the boy who was literally almost biblical, but born in the brewery stables.
Oh.
And had a way
Wow.
with horses. So yeah, I love those two. But you know what? Oh yeah, the other one, I tell you, then I start going on. I love the American Legion. It's so
Yes.
colorful. But
Yes,
a
I like the
Sunlit
colors of that one.
you know, I mean, when someone puts your initials on a Spitfire, you know, what
Right? What can you do?
I'm quite determined to get up in a Spitfire. So maybe the next time I go to England, I would just bite the bullet and go to Biggin Hill and book one of those flights. Yeah.
Well, I hope you get in a Spitfire one day.
Yeah, we'll see. You'll be the first to know.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Well, thank you both. Thank you, Kelly, for another
Yes, thank
great
you,
Of course.
interview.
Kathy.
Gosh, that's so much fun to talk to you.
Yeah, well, it's fun. It's always fun to be, and hopefully next year it'll be in person. That would be great.
That would be lovely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll make some
And
tea.
oh, that would be a dream, wouldn't it? That would be so wonderful. I am just very quickly putting in the chat the link to the page on Village Books website where all of Ms. Winspear's books are listed. And please remember that we do have autographed book plates. So if you purchase a book, we will send you an autographed book plate with your book purchase. And ladies, thank you again. Do you have any final parting words for us, for our audience?
Mine would be to always support your local independent bookshop. Always. You know,
I second that.
Yes.
you can't sign off without, you know, saying that, you know, and I think, yeah, I can't add to that with better not add to that. But yeah, I think that says it all. Support your, because, you know, you go into an independent bookstore, and I think what's wonderful is that you're browsing around and you see something you might never have seen if it popped up on your screen. And the wonderful thing about independent bookstores is that they really support new authors, and you know, that are not selling hundreds of thousands of books. And I think that's absolutely wonderful. And it's you know, where would any of us be without any of us authors be without the independent bookstores? I don't know. So thank you.
Well,
thank you very much.
You're welcome, and thank you. We deeply appreciate those words, and thank you so much for spending your time with us. And I also want to thank Claire for being such a magnificent event host and event guru.
Yeah, Claire,
it's been
brilliant.
great.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
all right.
thank
Well,
you, everybody.
I hope everybody has a lovely evening, and hopefully, hey, maybe we'll see you again in exactly 1 year.
Exactly 1 year.
That'd be
All right.
fantastic.
All right. Good night.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.